My name's John Carter. I used to have everything. A family, a home, a thriving business. Hell, I even thought I had love. Now, all of it's gone, and it's hard to tell where it all began to unravel. I remember the day everything changed. It was just another Tuesday. I was sitting in my office in Dallas, answering emails, looking over some financials for the construction company I ran. At the time, I thought my biggest problem was a client who was dragging their feet on a payment. Little did I know, the real storm was just around the corner. At noon, my phone rang. It was Susan, my wife, or I guess ex-wife now. At that point, I wasn't even sure why she was calling. We hadn't spoken much after the separation papers were signed. She always acted like the divorce was some kind of inevitable event that had to happen. Something I just have to accept. I tried to accept it, really I did. I did my part, kept the peace, paid my child support, even showed up to see my kids when she allowed me. But it never felt like I was anything more than a paycheck to her. That day, her voice sounded different. Tired, broken, but still that same manipulative tone she always used when she wanted something. "John," she started, her voice wavering slightly. "We need to talk. We're divorced, Susan. What more is there to talk about?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. The bitterness that had been simmering beneath the surface for months was bubbling over now. "You need to come home," she said. "I've got the papers. And, well, we need to talk about the kids." The kids. Damn it. That was always her trump card. My mind started to race, my pulse quickening. I had been afraid of this for weeks. I could hear the tension in her voice, like she was preparing to hit me with something big. "I'm not coming back," I said. "What's this about?" There was a pause on the other end. I heard the sound of something shifting, like papers being moved around. Then she spoke again, her voice cold, controlled. "I'm taking the kids, John, and I'm taking everything we've worked for. You don't deserve it anymore." Those words hit me harder than any punch ever could. I didn't know how to react at first. The pain of that moment seared through me, burning everything I thought I knew. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, louder than the conversation itself. My thoughts scattered, falling apart like the life I thought I had. "Are you serious?" I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. I could feel the anger welling up inside me, a mix of disbelief and betrayal. How could she? After everything we'd built together? After everything I'd sacrificed for her and those kids? I was the one who worked day and night to provide for us. I was the one who showed up to every school play, every doctor's appointment. And she was just going to take it all? "Yes, John," she said. "I've already made the arrangements. The house, the business, the kids, everything is in my name now. You don't get a say." And just like that, everything crumbled. It was like she'd reached into my chest, ripped my heart out, and left me standing there, empty, hollow, exposed. All the years of hard work, all the hours of sacrifice, and it was like it meant nothing to her. I remember sitting there in my office, staring at the screen of my computer. The numbers on the spreadsheet blurred in front of my eyes. Felt like the walls were closing in. A knot tightened in my stomach. Couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but what would that do? Nothing. Nothing at all. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally stood up, my legs felt like jelly. I stumbled to the window, my hands shaking as I looked out at the city skyline. I was a man who had lost everything. My business, my kids, my dignity, and I was about to lose myself too, unless something changed. The betrayal didn't stop with the divorce papers or the assets. No, it ran deeper than that. She took my kids from me. I couldn't even explain what it felt like to have them ripped away. No warning, no discussion, just gone. And every time I tried to fight for them, she pulled the strings tighter, making sure I was kept at arm's length. That was the moment the plan started to form. I knew I had to do something. I had to fight back, but not in the way she expected. No, this time I wouldn't be the victim. I wouldn't be the one begging. I was done begging. I don't know when it happened. The switch. Maybe it was when I realized how far she'd gone. How much she was willing to destroy, just to see me broken. But that rage, raw, bitter, unrelenting, fueled something else inside me. Something darker. And in that moment I realized, if I was going to get anything back, I was going to have to take it. No more playing nice. No more pretending like I could just let her win. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I could feel it. It was a low, gnawing sensation deep inside me. Something cold, something quiet. A plan that had started to take shape in the darkness of my mind. This wasn't over. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Ever felt that gut-wrenching loss? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. The first few days after Susan's call were a blur. I moved mechanically like a man possessed. I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone. The betrayal echoed in my mind like a constant hum, louder with every passing hour. But there was no time to wallow in self-pity. I had a decision to make. I could either let this go and walk away, or I could fight, and I was going to fight. I started by doing what I knew best, calculating. Susan had taken everything, but there were still cracks, weaknesses, and things she hadn't thought through. Her arrogance, her greed, it was all a facade. She thought she had it all. She thought she had won. But no one wins when they underestimate the person they've wronged. I began to gather my resources. The first thing I did was secure my own assets. I wasn't going to let her drain me dry, so I moved the remaining funds from my business account to a private account. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to get the ball rolling. I spent the next few days in silence, piecing together a strategy. I couldn't afford to get emotional. No outbursts, no yelling, no messy confrontations. I knew that Susan thrived on chaos. She needed that to maintain control over me. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not this time. I reached out to a few people I knew could help. There was an old acquaintance of mine, Martin. He was a lawyer who specialized in family law, but more importantly, he was someone who could navigate the murky waters of divorce and custody battles. I didn't trust him fully, but I didn't need to. I just needed him to get me the information I needed. The phone call was short and direct. "Martin, I need your help," I said, my voice steady, almost cold. "What kind of help, John?" he asked, his tone a little too curious for my liking. "I'm not going to get into details right now. Just get me everything on Susan. The divorce papers, the property transfers, her financials. Everything," I ordered. "And if you can, I need to find out where she's been hiding the kids." I could feel the weight of the request pressing on me, but I was already committed. This wasn't just about getting the kids back anymore. It was about revenge. I had to make sure she paid, and I couldn't afford to be sloppy. Martin was reluctant, but he agreed. He'd always had a soft spot for me, and I knew he would do whatever it took to keep me as a client. That was the first step. I had the groundwork in place. Next, I started to pay attention to Susan's every move. Her social media accounts became my new obsession. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I pored over every post, every comment, looking for any sign of weakness, any chink in her armor. It was pathetic, I knew, but I needed to understand her. I needed to know where her vulnerabilities were. I found them. Oh, I found them. Susan was careless. She always had been. She flaunted her new life, her new friends, and her newfound freedom. But behind all the glamour, behind the photos and the fancy dinners, there was something I could use. She was using her new life as a cover to hide the truth about how deep she'd gone into debt. The house she'd taken from me, she couldn't afford it. Not without my assets. The business she'd destroyed was hemorrhaging money. I didn't know why she'd left these clues behind. Maybe she thought I was too stupid to notice, or maybe she was arrogant enough to believe I'd never fight back. Either way, it didn't matter. I was going to use it all. The debts, the lies, the manipulation. I also made sure to gather information on her new relationship. She'd moved on quickly, as she always did. There was a man, Thomas. I'd known about him for months, but what she didn't know was that I had connections. I knew people who knew him, and soon enough, I found out everything I needed to know about Thomas. He wasn't just some guy she'd been seeing casually. He was heavily involved in the business dealings that had cost me everything. I wasn't going to let him slide by unnoticed. Susan had aligned herself with the wrong people, and that was something I could exploit. The plan began to take shape. It was intricate, layered. One false move, one slip-up, and it could all come crashing down. But I wasn't afraid of the risks. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was more afraid of becoming the man who let this go, of letting her win. Every night I would lay in bed, replaying everything in my mind. The faces of my kids. The way they looked at me as Susan told them I was nothing more than a paycheck. How they didn't understand why their dad couldn't just be there anymore. I made promises to them, silent promises. I would fight for them. I would get them back. And Susan, she would pay for what she did to me. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I had nothing left to lose. The plan had been in motion for weeks now, and the time had come. I had the pieces I needed, all carefully arranged, each one poised to fall into place. The anger had faded, replaced by cold resolve. The rage that had once consumed me had become something far more potent. Strategy. I wasn't some hapless victim anymore. I was the one pulling the strings now. It started with Thomas. My first move was subtle. I knew Susan's new man wasn't just a player in the background. He was the linchpin. His company, his reputation, it all had a fragile web of financial dealings that could collapse with a single push. I spent days digging into his business, his associates, his dirty laundry. It wasn't hard. Thomas had a history of shady dealings, of bending the rules to make a quick buck. And like most people, he thought his secrets were buried deep. But I had learned the art of digging, of finding what people wanted hidden the most. I hired a private investigator to get close to him, a man who had no idea what was coming. His name was Derek. He was a quiet guy just doing his job, but the information he dug up was enough to set the stage. I learned about Thomas's financial struggles, the pending investigation into his tax evasion, and his ties to a couple of questionable individuals. Those were the threads I needed to pull. I knew the right people to send the right tips to, people who would take that information and turn it into something far more damaging than just rumors. But that was just the beginning. The real work was done in silence, from the shadows. I knew Susan's weakness, her biggest insecurity, her need for control. She always had to have everything in her grasp. I knew how to manipulate her to reveal herself. I set up an anonymous email account and started sending her small, cryptic messages, little pieces of information that played to her paranoia. First, it was a note about Thomas's financial issues. Then, a whisper about his infidelity. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. Her need for dominance would push her into the panic I needed. She'd start doubting him, questioning everything. I could almost feel her unraveling. I remember one night, just before I sent the final message, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The man staring back at me was cold, distant, a stranger wrapped in bitterness and revenge. But what did it matter? There was nothing left for me in that old life. There was nothing left but this. The day came when I executed the final phase of my plan. I had arranged a meeting with Martin, the lawyer. I hadn't told him everything, of course, but I'd given him enough to make sure he'd be ready to act. I had the divorce settlement, the hidden assets, and a pile of paperwork that Susan had thought she had buried. The truth was, she was careless. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she had everything under control. She was wrong. The meeting with Martin went like clockwork. I handed him the evidence and he got to work. I remember sitting there in that sterile office as he made phone calls, filed documents, and set the wheels in motion. My hands were steady, my mind clear. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. Susan's life was about to implode, and I was the one pulling the trigger. I watched her through the glass of her high-rise apartment a week later. She didn't know what was coming. Her days of living in a false world of control were numbered. Her lies were catching up to her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sick satisfaction in knowing that she was getting exactly what she deserved. But as the revenge began to unfold, something started to change inside me. I had expected to feel victorious, but what I felt was emptiness. Every victory felt hollow. With each document I filed, with each strategic move I made, the satisfaction I thought I would feel slipped further and further away. What was I doing this for? Was it really justice? Or was I just trying to fill the void she left? Was this all worth it? I thought I had everything figured out. I thought I could erase the hurt, the loss, the humiliation. But the more I executed, the more I realized how little of me was left. All this planning, all this revenge, what had it really cost me? I looked at the email I had sent Susan, the one that would finally unravel her relationship with Thomas, and I hesitated. I knew the damage it would cause. It would crush her. But would it make me feel whole again? Would it bring me the peace I thought I would feel when I took everything from her? It was too late to turn back now. If you've ever gone to extreme lengths for revenge, or questioned whether it was worth it, share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about the true cost of getting even. If this resonates with you, hit the like button and subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. It wasn't until the aftermath that I truly realized what I had done. Revenge had a way of morphing into something more dangerous, something I hadn't accounted for. It was no longer just about getting even. It was about who I had become. I remember the night I sat alone in my apartment after everything had fallen into place. The documents had been filed, the emails sent, the calls made. I should have felt relief, maybe even triumph. Instead, all I could feel was the cold weight of isolation. The first sign of the consequences hit when the phone calls started rolling in. They came fast and relentless, one after another. Martin was on the other end, confirming the legal actions we had taken were progressing smoothly. I should have been happy. This was the end of Susan's world. Her empire of lies and deceit was crumbling, one brick at a time. But all I could hear in my mind was the silence of my children. How I couldn't protect them from this mess. "John," Martin said, "they're pushing back. Susan's lawyer is demanding full custody of the kids, and they've got your financials all over the place. You need to act fast if you want to keep the momentum." A knot tightened in my chest. She was fighting back. Of course she was. She wasn't going to let this happen without a fight. But I had underestimated the emotional toll it would take on me. Her vengeance wasn't just about taking my assets. It was about taking everything that made me who I was. My family, my children, my legacy. I hung up the phone and found myself staring blankly at the wall. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Everything felt too much. The chaos, the heartbreak, the betrayal. It all blurred together. And the worst part was realizing that none of it had even brought me the peace I had hoped for. The next few days were a whirlwind. Susan had started reaching out to the press. She was trying to spin the narrative, telling anyone who would listen that I was an unfit father. She painted herself as the victim, the wronged wife. Her words were poisonous, and they were working. People in my circle, people who had once respected me, started turning their backs. I could feel the walls closing in. My reputation, my name, everything I had built. She was taking it all. But it didn't stop there. The worst blow came when I found out Susan had managed to turn the kids against me. They were starting to believe her version of the story. They were calling me the villain, the man who didn't fight for them. I had fought like hell. But in the eyes of my children, it didn't matter anymore. They didn't understand the complexities, the pain. They didn't know the sacrifices I'd made, the sleepless nights, the stress of trying to keep our family afloat. All they knew was that their father, the man they loved, had become the enemy. I thought I would feel satisfaction when Susan's empire began to fall apart. I thought it would feel like justice, like a weight had been lifted. But what I didn't expect was the crushing emptiness that followed. I found myself alone, isolated in my own life, with only the sound of my breathing in the silence of my apartment. The revenge had come full circle, but I hadn't accounted for the toll it would take on me. My emotions were raw, torn between guilt and satisfaction, between regret and the belief that I was in the right. And yet, in the quietest moments, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was never going to end. The cycle of pain and loss would continue, and I had no idea how to break free. I walked into the kitchen that night, my hands shaking as I poured myself a drink. My reflection in the dark window was a stranger. The man who had just taken down the woman who had destroyed him didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like anything at all. I thought I would find peace. But peace had never been part of the plan. The real question was, had it all been worth it? Time is a strange thing. It moves slowly when you're drowning in pain, yet, in retrospect, it can pass in the blink of an eye. The months following the execution of my revenge were a blur. Days bled into nights, and I found myself existing, not living. The consequences of my actions, of everything I had carefully orchestrated, hit me harder than I could have imagined. I had won. That much was true. Susan's life crumbled just as I had planned. The court cases were dragging on, the media was turning against her, and Thomas's finances, well, they were in freefall. But none of it had the satisfaction I expected. There was no grand moment of vindication, no sense of triumph. Instead, there was just this overwhelming, suffocating silence. I watched my kids from afar. Susan had succeeded in alienating them, turning them against me with her poisonous words. I tried to reach out. I sent letters, gifts, messages, but nothing worked. Every attempt to reconnect was met with a cold wall, a rejection I could never have prepared for. My children, the ones I had fought for, had been lost in the crossfire of my revenge. I couldn't help but wonder if Susan had won after all. She had stolen my family from me, my kids, my wife, everything that mattered, and in trying to destroy her, I had destroyed myself. My relationships were fractured, my reputation tarnished, and my business was hanging by a thread. I had spent so much time trying to take control, trying to get back what was mine, that I had lost sight of the very thing I had wanted to protect, the people I loved. I spent long nights reflecting, looking out over the city from my small apartment, wondering where it all went wrong. How had I allowed my pain to define me so completely? How had I become this person, this hollow shell of the man I once was? I had wanted justice. I had wanted to make her pay. But in the end, all I had achieved was isolation. One night, I found myself at the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, the same as I had countless times before. The bartender, a man who had seen me walk in and out of this place every week for months, leaned over the counter. "John," he said softly, as if he were afraid of what he was about to say. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, man. You've won. Whatever you needed to do to get closure, it's over now. But you're still here, drinking away your life. What's next?" His words were simple, but they cut deeper than any knife. What's next? I didn't have an answer. I had spent so long consumed by the idea of revenge that I hadn't even considered what would come after. When the smoke cleared, when the dust settled, what was left? The truth was, I didn't know how to live without this war. It had become a part of me, a part of my identity. And now that the battle was over, I was left with nothing but the wreckage. As I left the bar that night, the weight of everything hit me all over again. The loneliness, the regret, the hollow feeling in my chest. I realized I had been searching for something that didn't exist. A resolution, a sense of peace that would come from watching her lose everything. But peace wasn't something you could take from someone else. It was something you had to find for yourself. I tried reaching out to people I had pushed away during the war, old friends, family I had distanced myself from. It was awkward at first. They didn't know the full extent of what had happened, and frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted them to. But slowly, I began to rebuild some of the bridges I had burned. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but I knew I had to make amends if I ever wanted to move forward. But the hardest part was facing the truth about my children. They were still out there, and I had no idea if they'd ever be a part of my life again. It was a pain that gnawed at my insides every day, a wound that refused to heal. The divorce, the custody battle, it was all a distant memory now. But the scars of what I had lost would never fade. I began to realize that my definition of justice had been skewed. I had thought revenge would make things right, that taking everything from Susan would somehow fix the emptiness inside me. But it hadn't. It only made things worse. I had punished her, yes, but I had punished myself even more. The hardest truth to swallow was that there would be no happy ending. There would be no perfect closure. I couldn't bring back the years I had lost, the love that had once been between Susan and me, or the relationship I had with my children. What I had done was irreversible. I couldn't undo the damage, no matter how much I wanted to. The last thing I realized was that revenge, in all its twisted glory, was never the answer. It may have given me a temporary sense of power, but it had stolen my humanity in the process. The darkness that had taken root in me had consumed everything. And now, with no one left to blame, I was left with the bitter aftermath. As I looked out at the city one last time, I understood what Martin had meant when he'd said that revenge wasn't the solution. It wasn't just that it didn't fix anything. It destroyed everything. And so I walked away from the bitterness, from the anger, from the idea that revenge was the only way to get back what I had lost. It wasn't. I had to rebuild myself, slowly, piece by piece, and learn to live with the consequences of my choices. The journey ahead was uncertain, and there would be no guarantees. But I had to start somewhere. I don't know if I'll ever see my kids again. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive myself. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the past lifting, if only a little. And maybe, just maybe, that's a beginning. Have you ever realized that revenge doesn't heal the wounds you think it will? Or perhaps you've faced the long-term consequences of your own actions. Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is forgive yourself.